So I think today's talk is primarily about something called the 5 Jhana factors. It's very much about how we can train our mind with concentration. And earlier on this morning, we did some exercises in concentration or developing Samadhi. And in the Buddhist tradition, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few pathways to awakening, and essentially 3 pathways. One pathway is the pathway of shamatha or samatha, and that is developing highly concentrated states of mind so that we can direct our attention, our concentrated state of mind, the clarity and the power of that concentrated state of mind to realizing the nature of phenomena, the nature of ourselves, the nature of our world, and wake up. So that's the path of serenity first. Another path is the path of vipassana, or the path of insight. And the path of insight, technically, it doesn't need to cultivate this concentration first. It begins by just practicing mindfulness. And it's a way of waking up without cultivating serenity first. So what I've noticed in that particular path, however, is that people develop a strong states of concentration, but it's called momentary concentration. It's called this capacity to focus on one thing at a time. So that's the dry insight path. And another path is the path of serenity and insight, where they're kind of equally balanced. And when I first began my practice, 45 years ago, I tried to practice the path of serenity first, and it was a dismal failure because I couldn't concentrate my mind. I was a young man, and my mind was all over the place. And I found insight worked well, so I practiced insight. Then I practiced in those traditions, the insight traditions, for many years. And in the last, say, 15 years, I've been inclining to cultivate serenity first before I practice insight. And I found that serenity enhances the insight. It turbocharges it. So these days I tend to practice serenity, and serenity first, and in any one meditation practice, I will usually practice serenity, and then in the last part of the meditation, I'll turn my mind to contemplating something as it is. In other words, I'll cultivate insight. So when I was a monk in Thailand, that was the way we learnt it as well. As a monk in Thailand, the teachings were like this. They would say, go off and still your mind, calm your mind, get a peaceful mind, get a clear mind, and then inquire. So, in other words, their practice was serenity and insight equally balanced. So, get a calm mind, get a clear mind, let your mind be focused, and then contemplate the nature of reality, contemplate the nature of self, contemplate impermanence, not self, and unreliability or dukkha. It was seeing into the 4 truths, contemplate the 4 truths, and so on. So what I'm talking about today is the cultivation of serenity, so that we have a powerful mind to penetrate into phenomena, to see the nature of ourselves, to see the nature of the world, the nature of life, and to wake up, basically. So Samadhi, as I was mentioning earlier, Samadhi is concentration. It literally means that's a Pali word. It literally means the bringing together of attention, gathering attention, and putting it in one spot. And it's both. It can refer to that term Samadhi can refer to one-pointedness. It can refer to a unified mind, which is a result of practicing Samadhi. And it can also refer to the practice itself. It can refer to a style of meditation. And what happens when we begin to cultivate samadhi, for most people, including myself, especially myself, we confront obstacles. We confront a number of obstacles. I don't know if anybody managed to focus their attention completely in the meditation we had before morning tea, or while you're walking and so on. But I know that when I sit and meditate in the past and also now, I still get what's called the hindrances arise. The hindrances, there's 5 classic hindrances. These hindrances, well, the first one is called sensual desire. Other ways we can understand it is obsessive desire or obsessive wanting. And this first hindrance is about being obsessed with getting things from the world. It's based on pleasure. And sometimes people talk about the 8 worldly winds, which are praise and blame, loss and gain, pain and pleasure, fame and disrepute, as something we strive for and also want to reject. We like to get praise, we don't like to get blame. We like to have gain, we don't like to lose things. We like to have pleasure, we don't like to have pain. And we like to have fame, or at least social acceptance, versus social rejection and condemnation. So this first hindrance is about being hijacked, being stolen away from our meditation object into our obsessions about wanting something. It's like it's about wanting the positive aspects of those 4 polarities. The next hindrance is called ill will, and ill will is about that other aspect of those 8 worldly winds that I just mentioned, those polar opposites. Ill will is about rejection, condemnation, pushing away, avoidance, not wanting. And ill will is divisive. It separates us from things. It doesn't allow us to collect our mind. So when you're sitting, one can have ill will towards people or places or things, or it tends to scatter the mind. It tends to divide the mind. It separates you from something. And it's quite uncomfortable, actually. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced ill will. Has anybody ever experienced ill will there? I think so, yeah. Most of us have experienced ill will. Sometimes in Buddhist quarters it's described as anger. I think ill will is probably a better way of describing it. It's this tightness in the heart that pushes away, and it pulls us away from meditating because we can't focus. We can't allow, we get stolen by that experience. So there's a lot I can talk about ill will, but today's talk is not necessarily about the hindrances, it's about the factors of the jhanas. So I'll just go through the rest of these hindrances first. It's called sloth and torpor in Buddhist quarters, but I think a better way of describing it would be mental thickness and dullness. Mental thickness and dullness is like when we have a fog in our mind, when we can't see clearly. Sometimes it's related to sleepiness, but it's probably better to understand it as dullness. Now, one way I could describe this is that with mindfulness practice, say when we're practicing mindfulness, we're endeavouring to be aware and attentive. What we are attentive to are 6 sense spheres like sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and mind, like experiences that come our way through our senses. And in the Abhidharma, which is Buddhist psychology, they talk about being conscious and unconscious. There's moments of conscious awareness, and there's moments of non-perception. Non-perception is like when we sleep. When we go to sleep, we're not perceiving anything. Our mind is completely dull. We're completely enveloped with this non-perception. So what happens in meditation and mindfulness practice is it is about increasing moments of conscious awareness, increasing moments of perception, and decreasing that level of non-perception, that level of forgetfulness, that level of being taken away by something and forgetting what we're doing. So this third hindrance, mental dullness or mental thickness, is about forgetting the object. It's about your mind being so dull that it can't actually perceive the object that we're intending to perceive, if that makes sense. It usually manifests as kind of sleepiness, and when you're sitting there, you're nodding your head and dropping off. That's the way. Sorry? So that's.
Are you talking? Is ignorance another word for it?
No. Ignorance is something else. No. I'll talk about ignorance maybe another time, but it is one of the hindrances. It is this mental thickness and dullness that overcomes us and prevents us. It becomes an obstacle for our meditation practice. It is actually these 5 hindrances. They're classic hindrances. They're not only obstacles for progressing in meditation, they're also obstacles for progressing in life. And to live a valued life, they block us. So the first hindrance is obsessive desire or sensual desire, wanting, sort of being preoccupied with sensual pleasures, like a cup of coffee, chocolate, sex, all sorts of things, music, whatever.
Yeah.
Craving very strongly. Craving is relevant in both the first hindrance and the second hindrance. We're craving for pleasure in the first hindrance. The second hindrance being ill will, it is craving to push something away. Craving it, aversion, if that makes sense. So first hindrance, obsessive desire. Second hindrance, ill will. Third hindrance, mental thickness and dullness. It is this being, not having many moments of consciousness. No, conscious awareness is probably a better way of describing it rather than consciousness. And so the next hindrance is called restlessness. And there's a couple of ways of understanding restlessness. It's also called mental agitation and worry. Often it's about the mind being stuck in regret and remorse about things that have happened in the past, like tormenting ourselves and worrying about things that we've done, or worrying about things that we might do, or worry in general is usually about the future, and rumination is usually about the past. So we often ruminate about things we've done wrong or badly, or and restlessness can also be understood as this kind of scatteredness of mind, like going from one thing to the next, to the other, and so on and so forth. So restlessness becomes a hindrance in meditation and also in life. I mean, I'm a clinical psychologist. I see people, lots of people daily. Often it's about being caught up in worry and rumination. Worry is a feature of anxiety. Rumination is a feature of depression. So this particular hindrance is quite detrimental and an obstacle for leading a happy life and mental health and also awakening. The next hindrance is called paralyzing. Well, it's called doubt, but I'd like to clarify that. It's more paralyzing doubt. I think doubt in general is quite a healthy thing. We have, I know I doubt many things that I hear on the radio and news reports and things I read on internet. I think that's healthy to doubt those things. When it comes to this particular hindrance, however, it is paralyzing. It's a paralyzing doubt. It's this lack of conviction or a lack of understanding that this is a positive path to go down. One way this paralyzing doubt has been explained in the sutras is like a person at the fork of a road not knowing which direction they should take, so they just remain there kind of paralyzed or stuck, not going anywhere. And the way it manifests in meditation is, it can be quite subtle, is that when you don't have confidence in this particular practice or confidence in this particular effort that you're applying, then you don't put energy into doing it. It's like this is a reservation. You sit back and you just nothing happens. So these 5 hindrances are what happens with the untrained mind, which is most of us. There's a few people who have very good trained minds, but for most of us, we have an untrained mind and we get hijacked and taken away, and our progress is obstructed by these hindrances. And there are lots of ways to deal with them. There are many different strategies. We can deal with them with insight and serenity. And one way we deal with them is by cultivating concentration. And the ways we cultivate concentration, or samadhi, can be broken up into 5 factors. These 5 factors are called the 5 factors of jhana. Now, jhana is a highly concentrated state of mind, basically. It's a concentrated state of mind. And sometimes people define jhanas by having the 5 factors. If these 5 factors are arising, it's said that you're cultivating the jhanas. So the 5 factors, I'll just go briefly through them and then I'll go into detail. The first factor is called vitika in Pali, and it refers to initial application. Now, there's a bit of controversy about this in the scholarly controversy about this, because vitika literally means thinking. And sometimes people say, well, it's not really thinking, it's about putting your attention into something. However, if you look at the Eightfold Path, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, what happens with the way we can describe intention, like right intention, sometimes it's described as right thought, meaning that we direct our attention to something in a skillful way. We think about something in a skillful way. It's like you have the intention to listen to me right now. That's your intention, I imagine. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Intentions are very, very powerful to enable us to practice on the path. They're the second factor on the path, so it's very important. So this understanding of it being called vitika can have meaning here. Initial application with the 5 factors means one plunges one's attention into an object. If you're paying attention to your breath, you're putting your attention into it. You're putting your attention into it, and it has strong intention to go into it. It is quite effortful. You're remembering to be attentive to the breath. The breath. Your intention is going into that. So it's like, that's where I'm going. And that's why I emphasized creating those wholesome intentions at the beginning of the meditation period, because it's very, very important. You remember your intention and it helps you. helps you. So the next factor is called, in Pali it's called vichara. And I think the translation of vichara means sort of like thinking, but not as discursive as vitika. It means sort of examining something. It's like you examine the way things are, like you contemplate it. It's a lot deeper. In the practice, it means sustained application, sustaining your attention. So you plunge it in with vitika, and then you sustain it with vichara. You plunge it in with initial application, remembering to come back, and then you're staying with it with sustained application. So it's kind of like directing your attention and then fixing it on the object. And in the case previous, this morning we did mindfulness of breath, but you could do it with any object, really, as long as it's a wholesome object. The thing about Samadhi practices, you can do them with any object you choose, as long as it's not causing harm or distress, or it's not an object that's wrong concentration. It's right concentration. It leads in a path that will lead to happiness and well-being and awakening. So these two factors, they're quite interesting. They kind of work together, and in the text they've been described in different ways. Bhikkhu Bodhi, or in the suttas, which Bhikkhu Bodhi has translated a lot of suttas, he said it's like striking a bell. The striking of it is this initial application, and the sound resonating as a bell sound is sustained application. Another way I like to describe it, once upon a time I used to surf, but not very well, but I remember paddling with my surfboard quite vigorously, and then the waves seemed to pick me up on the board and I can just balance on the board. So vitika, or initial application, is like paddling hard, like you're working at it, and then the wave seems to pick you up and you just ride it through, and that's like vichara, which is the sustained application. Another way I've heard it being described is like a bird flying through the air. The flapping of the wings is like this initial application, and then just flying through the breeze, flying through the air in a cruisy way is the sustained application. So when we can understand these factors, by the way, it really helps in our practice, because we're comprehending what's going on. We're being aware of what's going on, and we're more able to develop these factors as well as develop samadhi. So the third factor of these 5 factors is joy, also called rapture, and also in Pali it's called piti. Piti has various levels, and it's basically a kind of an energetic movement through your mind and body. It's effervescent, it's bubbly. Sometimes it's very subtle and it's not very strong. It could be just a wave of pleasantness as you're practicing meditation. You just have a moment of it. It's just this wave. It's really nice. It's really quite pleasant. Other times, at another end of the spectrum, it could be ecstatically blissful. This energetic movement of energy through your body. Sometimes I've heard, some of you may have heard of that term kundalini, and how the kundalini goes up and down our spine. It's a term that's used in yoga. I think that relates to piti at a strong level. So essentially, piti is this effervescent, rapturous, joyous experience. It's both physical and mental, and ultimately it's this lovely mental experience. And something that precipitates it, or something that a proximal cause for it, is the experience of gladness, is the experience of pleasure, like feeling happiness arise. And the happiness, I'll talk about happiness in a minute. It's feeling a joy arise in response to pleasure. But it's a pleasure that arises from concentration rather than, a sensual experience, like having a nice piece of chocolate or something like that. So it's pleasurable. So when you can notice this experience, when you can notice some pleasure in your body, it becomes a portal into developing piety. And it's very easy to concentrate on something that's pleasurable. If the pleasurable experience is coming from your meditation, you focus in on it, and it becomes a way of arising piety in your body and in your mind. Sorry. So then the next factor is, it's called sukha in Pali, and dukkha means suffering and unpleasantness. Sukha means happiness, generally. Now, the sort of happiness that arises in the 5 factors is not the sort of happiness that we get from, when we watch a good TV show, or we have a nice piece of chocolate, or do something quite worldly. It's a happiness that arises from a concentrated mind. And the proximal cause for happiness here is piety. What happens with piety, it's quite effervescent. It can be just quite subtle and not very strong. There might be some gentle movements of waves, or experiences of piety moving through your being, and then it'll change to complete movement through your whole body, pervading your body. That is a proximal cause for happiness. Happiness here means a kind of happiness that arises from a concentrated mind, and it is light. It's not as effervescent and bubbly and energetic as piety, but it's this light-hearted carefreeness. I feel it in my heart when this is happening. It's this lightness of heart. It's really quite lovely. It's quite tranquil. It's very peaceful, and it's just this. It's like a smile on your face when you have something really lovely happening to yourself. It's this really lovely, light-hearted feeling in your heart. So I'm telling you this because we have these experiences, not at the level of jhanas, but we have these experiences in daily life. And if we can identify them and pay attention to them, it allows them to get stronger. Often in daily life we'll miss out on positive experiences. We have something called negative bias. Negative bias is where it's an evolutionary thing. It's about survival, where our mind is predisposed to look out for threat, to look out for danger, to look out for things not going our way, or things that are not so good. So we tend to develop a negative bias. So if we go out in the world, we're looking for dangers, looking for threats, all the rest of it. That's all we see. We don't actually see the joys and the happinesses of life. So the reason I'm explaining these experiences of happiness is that so that you can notice them. When you notice them, you can feed into them. You can bring your attention to them and strengthen them. And that becomes a way of working with the negative bias. Negative bias is actually some of the mechanisms behind why we get anxious and depressed. So it's shifting that negative bias to a positive bias in many respects. Rick Hanson talks about it as he talks about Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good as the negative bias. So the opposite of that would be Teflon for the bad and Velcro for the good, if that makes sense. So First factor, initial application. Second factor, sustained application. Third factor, piety, or this kind of joyous, rapturous feeling. Fourth factor, happiness. And if we think of body, where it happens in the body, piety happens pervading through your body. Happiness sort of is centralized around the heart, but it's kind of touches every cell of your body as well. The last factor. Oh, I'm not doing too badly. I've got a bit of time now. The last factor is called unification of mind, and also called one-pointedness. So I'll just explain one-pointedness a bit first. One-pointedness means that what happens is as we're developing focus on something, everything else falls away. Everything else becomes irrelevant. Our attention focuses completely on the object of our attention, and we become absorbed into it. Another way, sorry, I'll just have a bit of a diversion here. Some ways the jhanas are described in the texts is as absorptions. Because what happens when we get concentrated on something, we absorb into it. It's like that becomes our total area of awareness and attention, and we get absorbed completely into it. So do you remember how I did a gratitude? I asked you to think of some things that you're grateful for earlier in the day. And then I suggested you let the thoughts go and then focus on the experience of gratitude. In many respects, what happens there is that we begin to focus on a particular experience and we become absorbed into it. It becomes us and we become it. So gratitude can fill your being, and you lose barriers with external aspects. It's like your mind becomes very expansive. Gratitude, I think, is one of the four divine abodes. I think it's mudita, also called appreciative joy, or sometimes empathetic joy, or sympathetic joy. And this particular quality, the four divine abodes are technically serenity meditations because they're emphasizing absorption and concentration. So coming back to one-pointedness. One-pointedness means that one becomes completely focused on one thing, completely absorbed into that thing. Everything else falls away, and that's it. One-pointedness. So another way of describing this is being called unification of mind, this factor. And it sort of comes at a different angle. And perhaps I'll explain a little bit about the mind, or a system of mind that's spoken about in the Yogacara school of Buddhism. So within this system of mind, what we have is conscious mind and unconscious mind. So conscious mind is everything that comes to our consciousness, things that we're aware of, sight, sound, smell, touches, tastes, and mental phenomena, or mind. So it's like conscious mind is what we are aware of in the moment. But unconscious mind is everything that's underneath that. Unconscious mind is like the mechanisms and the workings of how we perceive the senses, for example. And there's a whole range of mechanisms going there and functions going on in our brain, for example. Just coming back to the brain, when we see something, there's a whole range of things going on under consciousness, unconscious, that are presenting vision. like so many things that we're unaware of. So that's the conscious mind is what we're aware of, or what we can be aware of. The unconscious mind is what we're not aware of. And there's the five senses. We're not aware of many things that are going on underneath our conscious awareness, but we are aware of sights, sounds, smells, touches, and tastes. Now, underlying the conscious awareness of mental phenomena or mind is all these mechanisms that are in our unconscious. And I think there's, in this particular way of understanding things, the Yogacara school, they talk about the logical mind, the narrative mind, and the emotional mind, unconscious mind. And these are all processes that are happening. I was talking about conscious mind and unconscious mind. We've talked about the sensory conscious mind, like the five senses, and the unconscious processes that are occurring to present, the senses to the world. We're often filtering out an enormous amount of information, and what comes to our conscious mind is just a fraction of what the amount of information that comes our way and gets processed. So now we're talking about conscious mind and unconscious mind, and we know that there's so many things that are going on unconsciously in our minds. Like we have many memories and many associations and all sorts of things. And in the Yogacara school, they've talked about logical thinking, like analysing things, understanding things logically. Emotional mind, which is this emotional processing. Basically, it's I won't go into details now, but underneath consciousness or unconscious, we have many factors related to why we react emotionally to different things. What will come into conscious mind will be our emotion. And another aspect is called narrative mind, which is really interesting. Narrative mind is this creation of the self. It's like, do you notice that everything you look at and think about is always related to someone central? Do you notice that? Like me? Well, not this me, you me. You notice that? It all revolves around you. The world revolves around this sense of self. The narrative mind works very strongly to create this sense of self. So, what happens? What happens here is that all these different sub-minds that are unconscious are vying for the attention of the conscious mind. They've got all this information they're going through, going through their pathways to get conscious mind's attention. And often they're competing. Like we might sit down to meditate, making the intention to meditate. We say, I'm just going to be mindful of the breath for the next 20 minutes or half an hour or hour and a half or whatever it is. And then we start thinking about that cup of coffee that we miss, or what we need to do at work, or the relationship issue that we have, or whatever it is. It's like competing intentions come along and take us away off the object. Does anybody ever notice that? The five hindrances, they make up what happens in our meditation. Like we might procrastinate, or we might have mental mind wandering, or monkey mind, where the mind shifts all over the place. We have all sorts of things happening in our meditation practice. And what happens is these competing intentions are vying for our attention, and some of them get through and succeed. So, coming back to unified mind now. What unified mind is that the sub-minds are unified in their intention. They're all coming together so that they're unified in their goal. They're unified in their intentions. It's a unified mind. They're all working together. An example that I've seen in Chula Dasa's book, called The Mind Illuminated, he's got 6 or so horses tied to a central something, like a post or something like that. Not a post, just a hub. And all these horses are going in different directions. So they're not moving. The hub's not moving. It's just kind of, they're competing with one another. That's what happens with the untrained mind when we haven't been able to work skillfully with the hindrances, and they take over. Actually, don't feel so bad. I mean, everyone has the hindrances. The hindrances are working with the hindrances are the business of meditation. And when we no longer have hindrances, we are completely awake. So don't worry about it if you still have hindrances. You know, you're in it together with many of us, most of us actually. So, but this ununified mind is like going in different directions. So no wonder we can't focus. So a unified mind is like the horses all tied together. So they're still pulling a hub, but they're all going in the same direction, so they go powerfully. Unified mind is the 5th factor. And the way we get to that is by going through these factors of serenity. We're continually setting our intention and remembering our intention, coming back, sustaining it, experiencing, noticing the piety and allowing the piety to enhance our happiness. And when all these factors co-arise, we have a unified mind. With the unified mind, we can direct our attention to whatever we want. If we want to inquire about the nature of reality, or the nature of self, or develop insight in some respects, that's what happens. The aim of Samadhi is, or serenity meditation practice, or samatha, as I mentioned earlier today, the aim of it is to create a mind that is fit for purpose, a mind that is doing the job. The job is to have insight. Mind you, it's pretty nice, you know, experiencing lots of joy and happiness and beautiful equanimity. Probably beautiful is not the way to describe it, but contentment, equanimity, which is the results of all these samadhi practices. But essentially, the reason we do samadhi, the reason we practice serenity meditation, is to wake up, is to shift that powerful unified attention, unified mind, to realizing the way things are, to see our issues, to quell the hindrances. So this initial application, sustained application, piety or joy, happiness, and unified mind are a powerful mind. And they directly deal with the hindrances in this way, and I wrote it down, so I'm just checking it. There's a bit of disagreement about how the 5 jhana factors directly oppose and counteract the 5 hindrances, but this is what they say. One pointedness of mind, or unified mind, directly counteracts sensual desire. Okay? Rapture, and there's a controversy here. Some say rapture or joy, and others say happiness. I tend to agree with happiness overcomes ill will. Because when you're happy, how can you be hateful? How can you be divisive? How can you be feeling badly towards experiences? Initial application, which is like that strong intention, remember that strong intention to stay with it? That overcomes mental dullness, or, you know, sloth and torpor. And happiness and bliss, and some say joy, and I tend to agree with the the party that says joy, tends to settle and overcome restlessness and worry. And sustained application overcomes paralysing doubt. That makes sense, doesn't it? Like if we stick at the task and see it through, then it overcomes that sense of being paralysed by doubt. Okay. So, I think I've almost at the end of this talk, and essentially, I hope I've informed you or related that we have a number of ways to become awake and be free from suffering, to be free from dukkha, to find enlightenment, or just realise enlightenment, I should say, not find it. And these pathways involve serenity first, and then insight only, and also serenity and insight. And what happens when we can train our minds with the 5 factors of the 5 jhana factors, and also with the 4 satipatthana, or the 4 foundations of mindfulness, for example, is a way of overcoming the hindrances that arise with an untrained mind. So training the mind with the 5 factors is a way to peace, joy, happiness, contentment, equanimity, and awakening. So thank you very much. I think that's the end of my talk.